indeed for all agreeing to participate in this 1 hour quick run through law and algorithms. I think the overarching idea is to look at how algorithms affect the law and what should the law be doing with algorithms. So we're coming at this from 2 points. I hope it's interesting. I hope it's amusing and humorous. I would like it to be informative but light, because we found when we do these things again that people, especially in the afternoon, tend to fall asleep. So if we can keep people amused, then that's a bonus. What I'd like to do is just allow everybody on the round table or the panel or whatever we're calling it to introduce themselves and have a quick explanation to our attendees. I see we've now got 13 people watching, I think. If you'd like to tell us what you are doing and what your interest is in this subject, I think I'll do it in the order of the people who are on my screen. So, Birgitta, if I've pronounced your name properly, and I apologise if I'm going to cock it up all the way through the session, would you like to kick our event off by telling us what you do and where you're from? It's the Big Innovation Centre, a government think tank, not a government think tank, an independent think tank, which you are representing, and I'd like to know a little bit more about that, please.
Super. Thank you very much. So I'm just introducing myself here, not doing the kind of my...
just do a quick introduction and then we'll come back to you for the...
Okay. Okay, so my name is Birgitta Andersen, and I'm the CEO of the Big Innovation Centre, which is like an award-winning think tank based in London. And we got franchises also in the Middle East and in India now. And one of the major things that we're looking at as a think tank is clearly the future. So we look at emerging technologies and how they need to co-shape together with regulation and policy and of course business models. And we are also making things very serious, what we call citizen participation. So we are kind of a research hub, convener, co-shaper. We put ourselves in the industry of think tanks and network organizations and innovation communications agency.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, when everybody said hello, I'll kick off with the first question, and then you can use that as the basis for your introductory comments. On my list, so this is in no particular order, it's the way everybody's appeared, is Rachel Free from CMS. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Jeremy. It's lovely to be here today. Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining.
My background.
Yes, a quick explanation of your background. That'd be nice.
Yeah, my background is in AI. I studied AI at university, computer science, obviously, and I've been working as a patent attorney. I'm a partner in a law firm called CMS. I help clients protect their AI technology with intellectual property.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's a growing field, something I've been interested in for a long time, but I've got very interested in it recently. And I've been starting to work with you and Charles Kerrigan, who's also next conveniently on my list. Hi, Charles. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming.
Hi, Jeremy. Thank you. So I work with Rachel at CMS, a big international law firm. It's one of the biggest technology law practices in the world. My background is in corporate finance. So Rachel and I work together. She's the brains of the operation, and all being well, I show up with the money for transactions. So I work with investors, debt and equity in deep technology, including AI, and also on the policy areas that I think everyone on the panel today is interested in, and in particular with Birgitta, who I've worked with for many years in that context.
Oh, well, it's great to have you with us. Charles and I have known each other for a year or two, because we've both got an interesting tokenization, which we're not actually going to be covering here, but I'm sure if people want to tune in again, then we can do one on that in a few weeks. Great to have you here, Charles. Now, Vasily, I think it must be that way. I'm not.
Yes, you got it right.
Yeah, we met yesterday. Great. We got on like a house on fire talking about the use of AI in law, which is really great. So I'm glad you're here. If you'd just like to introduce yourself, then we'll get into some stuff when I've stopped talking.
Yeah, Jeremy, thanks for having me. And Vasilis Tzoulis, I'm the CEO and founder of Cognitive Plus. So Cognitive Plus is a document intelligence solution. So using AI and especially natural language processing, the technology that explains the meaning of the words, we develop algorithms to understand text and, to be more exact, to accelerate contract review. And now we're expanding on how can you review regulation and legislation.
Yeah.
So that's in part
it's a
what we're
great
doing.
subject. It's something I'm really deeply interested in, have been for a number of years. And I'm delighted that you've joined the panel, because you're one of the few people I know who's actually doing it rather than talking about it. So that's really cool. Okay, and then I'm going to go to two of my old friends, Kyle McFadden and Jack Sibley. Kyle first. Kyle, Jack and I set up a consortium at UCL, which is looking at deep tech in the real estate sector. So I thought that both guys would be able to contribute and give us a little bit of background knowledge about one industry in due course, which is the real estate sector. So Kyle McFadden from Greystar. Hi, Kyle.
Hi, everyone. Kyle McFadden from Greystar, like Jeremy said. I'm our Director of Business Operations. My background is mostly in corporate finance, like Charles. But over the last few years, I've been working more on digital technologies. How do we adopt them in the built environment? And that's how I met Jeremy. So excited to talk about the subject today. And to me, is what I want to learn most about is the ethics around it and how do we hold individuals accountable. So.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for coming along, Kyle. I know that you've been around the tech stuff for long enough now to ask some difficult questions, and we might even get to tease a couple of difficult answers from you. I don't know how long we've got, but we'll see how it goes. And then finally, bringing up the rear, Jack, currently with in Surami, was with Nuveen, one of the major players in London. Very interested in all sorts of disruption and innovation in the real estate sector. Very good on prop tech. Hi, Jack.
Hey, so I was muted.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me today. Yeah, my background is I used to run innovation for 3 or 4 years for Nuveen Real Estate, one of the largest, or the kind of top 5 real estate investors globally. And so everything from smart buildings to co-working and co-living to data and AI, and left about kind of 4 to 6 weeks ago now, so it's still relatively fresh, to join a company called Surami. We were kind of at the intersection of prop tech, so kind of real estate tech, and insure tech, using kind of next generation AI to underwrite company risk, and then off the back of that, effectively sell insurance policies to SME startups looking to take either office or warehouse space in the UK market. So yeah, I'm sure I'll be chipping in across the board, but give you a taste for kind of real estate as an industry, which I'm sure is one of the more maybe more challenging industries when we start thinking about the adoption of AI and technological sophistication.
Yeah,
so yeah.
And as we've discussed on a number of occasions, prop tech is suddenly starting to fly. Lots of new prop tech startups in the UK and around the world, and they're starting to use AI. It's been behind fintech, but it's taking off, isn't it, Jack? Really, that's the message I think that we're learning. Right, okay. I think what we'll do is we've got a few questions. We're going to keep this pretty light, but I've got 4 or 5 questions. Each question, I think we can go to 1 or maybe 2 towards the end of the speakers. And I think the easy way to do this is I'll pose a question to one of you. Let's get one reaction, and then if anybody wants to chip in before we move on to the next issues, if that's okay, everybody. So the first issue that I was going to ask Birgitta to look at is, why are algorithms important in a legal and also public policy context? That's the first thing we would like to just talk about. Why are these algorithms important?
So what I'll focus on for that answer, we are running the all-party parliamentary group on artificial intelligence and the all-party parliamentary group on blockchain. And of course, lots of the technology underpinning that is based upon algorithms, and machine learning is based upon algorithm. And clearly, you know, it's a big part of the way in which it can be made the technology work. What I want to say about the algorithm, in many ways, it's not the algorithm that's often the enemy when we're discussing things. It's about how it's applied and used. So therefore, the regulation by law and the corporate governance is very important, because the algorithm is not doing anything wrong. That's how we are actually applying and using it, and of course also what it tells. So if I can say, so what we've been discussing in the sense of what we've discussed in Parliament, these groups, we discussed like 3 things, and I'm calling them here kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly. We first have the algorithm's potential. This is what it can do well, the purpose, how it can help us to do a lot of problem solving in a more accurate and automated way and cost-efficient way. Then we get into more like the bad, where is the bad in the sense that we're looking at the data underpinning the algorithms. And these data we don't have enough data to make very good algorithms, or we don't have any agreement on how data are shared. And sometimes, therefore, the production of the results are not as good as it could be, and we don't have enough data to actually be training the algorithm. So we cannot really, the algorithm can be trained to become better. So we are kind of in a catch-22. We need the data to get better algorithms, but we don't want to share data because the algorithms are not so good. And then the last part, what I'm calling a little bit the ugly, which I focus a little bit more on, is really when we look at applications on where should algorithms be applied and where is there just a no-go for algorithm, and how are they sometimes pushing for the wrong decisions. And quite often when we have meetings, we call them evidence meetings as part of the all-party parliamentary group. Clearly, what's very important here with the policymakers is to focus on case studies. So I just mentioned just like 4 quite briefly. We had a major meeting after the scandal of the GCSE assessment results, and there was we were angry because the controversial use of algorithms to determine A-level results. The problem, of course, here with the algorithm was that the schools, or the algorithm was using previous years' prediction grades from the schools. So 40% of children got below what they had the predicted mark. And it became accused for being actually giving marks based upon postcodes and not performances. And this is clearly a problem where we have poor algorithms and biased algorithms, and the history behind the algorithms is creating inherent bias. So that was the education. I'll just move on to the next one just to flag. We also had meeting on the social media. Many social media platforms, like the tech giants platforms, are just giant algorithms. Basically, we are just there, notes on the platform, but this algorithm is underpinning it. And so basically, the algorithm is at the heart. And when we choose something, the algorithm says you want more of that, and that keeps pushing until we buy, literally. And also, every watch and click is stored, and data are shared in different ways with our geographical locations and behavioral data. So at the end of the day, we become more like a product of the algorithm, and all of a sudden the algorithm can detect who we're voting for, what we think, are engaged in conspiracy theory, or so we become a product of the platform rather than the platform become a product to help us. So this is, and there's been this major problems with that algorithm has fueled hate crime, extremist content, and of course self-harm, and we've had terrible consequences with teenager suicides. It's up 5 times now within the last 10 years, and it is now blamed. People start to look at these kind of echo chambers which become part of social media platforms. Now I go to the next one. We discussed insurance. We had a whole meeting on finance and insurance. I even think that Charles Kerrigan was speaking at it. So just to pick up an insurance point, we had at that meeting. We had other things on an investment, but insurance, there was clearly when an insurance is all about ensuring that we assess that somebody's chances that something would go wrong, and then you have insurance to help you if that goes wrong. And of course, the next thing is, could a computer do that for us? Then that would be great. the issue with insurance, of course, is already we've had the issue that male and females were treated differently and postcodes were treated differently when it came to car insurance, house insurance, health insurance. So we would think the algorithm should be able to do that much better. The problem is that, so somebody would be really careful, we'd want the algorithm to go and help.
Okay, can I just, right, I'm just going to interrupt you now and ask you a couple of questions. And I think that I'll do this with each of the speakers. And if anybody then wants to chip in, say so, and then if not, we'll move on to the next thing. But the big question for me is, should there be a regulator who stops people putting the algorithms on the market before they're allowed loose in the public? So on your great examples you've given, teaching, insurance, and I think it was financial services, should the teaching algorithm have had to go before a regulator who then assessed whether it was fit to be released in the public? That is a big question.
So what we have found there in Parliament is really that, so take this example I've had, and including other examples on policing and face recognition, etc. We come up with what we call a watchdog. And basically there must be kind of an algorithm watchdog that should address the purpose of algorithms and identify who's accountable for this purpose is actually achieved, and address, and the watchdog should also address if the algorithm behave in accordance with purpose or if it offers risk. And in particular, that should be looked at that it does not replicate biases or reinforce what we call societal prejudice or systematic discrimination of individual groups. And there should always be a person in the loop. You should never have an algorithm that's purely machine produced.
Okay, I'll chase you. If I get the chance, I'll chase you down on that. But Kyle, I think, Kyle, did you want to say something on that?
Yeah, but I mean, you know, kind of going back to the whole regulation, is that going to stifle innovation is the question I would have. Is it going to slow down innovation? So it's like, how do you do it in a more seamless approach? And I think kind of what Brigitte was talking about is probably more in line with that, because obviously we know these things are rapidly advancing and always coming out with new algorithms and new data sets. So it's like, how do you actually regulate that? How do you manage that when you have this volume of data? This is the question I would have probably to Vasilis or Brigitte. But
yeah, there's a tension, isn't there, between allowing innovation and making sure that things don't go wrong. Charles, do you think it should be, if we're going to go down this route, should it be a watchdog with no teeth and no powers? Or should it be a regulator who can enforce civil powers? Or should it be a court who can actually stop the algorithm?
I'll maybe pick up on your final point, and we've got in the questions someone referencing the fact that if you put a case before a court now, you get a different answer to what you would have got, say, 40 years ago. That should be a good thing. So I'll take the two together, and I think the premise behind the question is right, that law is a tool for the use of society, and therefore it should be driven in its policy objectives by society, not the other way around. So and to make a positive connection here for the English common law, because there is a level of judicial discretion in English common law, that does permit the evolution of societal views and development to take place. So what do I think about a regulator or a court in here? I think you need the broadest view to look at this. So for me, the incentives is always the issue that you come back to. How would the business describe itself internally? What is the product? What's it getting paid for? How does it make its money? And does the operation of the algorithm behave in a way that would be socially acceptable, socially useful? So this is picking up, I think, on the point that Brigitte was making, that if you simply allow the logic of the algorithm to run forward, then you can end up in some unpalatable places. But you only get there because the algorithm is given something to aim at that's either getting attention of users, as Birgitte says, or generating the most money. In another example, that can't be the only objective of an algorithm. And I think the difficulty with algorithms is they sort of take you down a chain of logic. You end up in one place which all of the logical steps make sense, but you've still ended up in a place that you don't want to be. So I've somewhat sort of fudged the question by saying I think we do need regulatory oversight, but that's also not just from a technical perspective, from a business perspective. What's the product and what are the commercial incentives? That's the key.
I guess, Charles, what you just said, would it be the regulating the data or the algorithm? Because, when you're saying you're taking it to a place you don't want to go, that's because the data that was fed into it, potentially. So like, it's kind of chicken and egg, is it not?
Yeah, I want to regulate the person who's running the algorithm, Kyle. That's who I want to go for. Now, I'd like to ask Birgitte, is there any prospect, do you think, that the big tech fangs, the Facebook's algorithms? I'll bring Vasilis in when we come to your question, because I think we're going to drill down in a moment. But if I just come back to Birgitte, do you think there's any real prospect that the fangs, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, will actually allow themselves to be subjected to independent oversight? Or will they simply say at the end of the day, look, we're there to make a profit, we're going to do what we want, we're happy to regulate our own algorithms, and we're not going to let you people stop us?
I think that they must. I think they will have to accept the oversight. I think that corporate governance becomes very important in these companies, and that can almost become their survival. I think that with all these social movements happening right now, with conspiracy theories and all other areas, and I don't want to go through what I already have mentioned. I think that these bodies will have to be regulated. I have been a little bit shocked with some of the responses we have seen in the short run from them, but they will have to accept at least a watchdog, or they will also have to maybe accept that the people may not want to join them if I know it's the people don't leave a huge platform, but they can. If you all of a sudden have a search engine that is not biased, we might have many people wanted to move from Google to that one. And actually, I do like Google's in many ways. I don't think they're the ones I would refer to here, but I just think that there's quite quickly in this thing with corporate governance becomes important. So that could be the competition, because the competition cannot be based upon the network, but it could be based maybe upon the corporate governance.
See, the bias problem is not easy. You mentioned insurance. Sheila's Wheels, which gave insurance to women at a discounted rate, was ruled by the European Court to be unlawful because it was biased against men. So when you apply to an algorithm the same logic, just because an algorithm is biased doesn't necessarily mean it should be struck down. So I think there's plenty of work here for the lawyers going forward. That's really what this session was just due to tease out. Okay, I'm going to move on to the second question. Vasilis.
Can I just say one thing? Instead of work for the lawyers, which are clearly great, but I think that to put in incentive systems that makes them actually want to be responsible and purposeful in the algorithms, I think that is what it's really about. It should be self-governing. Of course, law is very important to enforce by law, but then the problem is that we need incentive systems that makes people that can actually stimulate people's behavior, just as we have now with green patents to make people more environmentally friendly, and we have lots of incentive mechanisms we're not applying at all.
Yeah, the people will vote with the same as green. Okay, look, we'll just move on slightly, and then you can come back in to the next debate that we're just going to move seamlessly into. So I think that I'll ask Vasilis to answer this, and then bring Rachel in as another lawyer, different department in the same firm, see if we can get a different view. I always like to try to tease out a difference if we can find one. Is it a basic human right to be able to write an algorithm? That's the question I've got for you. It's because one guy who did some work for me said, I don't care what you lawyers say, you can't stop me. I can write a book, I can write an article, I can write a line of code. It's my basic fundamental human right to write an algorithm. And even if you try to stop me, I'll write an algorithm that self-replicates, and as soon as you try to close me down, it will pop up again, and you'll never beat me. So the law has had it. The computer scientists are going to win this battle, and there's no point you lot even trying to start. What do you think about that?
Book and you don't publish it, then it's a diary pretty much.
Hang on, we got some feedback.
So my thought is, you write algorithms for a specific purpose, right? And the other thing is, it's not coming to isolation. Most of the times, like almost every time, you take data from somewhere. So writing algorithms is fine. You can do that on your computer, and you can test it, and you don't have to release it. But then, where do you get the data from? This is, a question that we're all asking in any industry doing AI, and specifically on deep learning. So that's the big, I think the more, will echo all the people here is, is algorithmic analysis. It's okay. I mean, there are so many algorithms in any case right now. It's the intention of what you're trying to do and where you got the data. I mean, that's the most important thing. And the other thing is that with algorithms, I will say right now, what is happening on the market is that the most successful products you have right now is the ones you don't realize exist. So, for instance, you see all kind of recommendations and systems pushing you to decide something into a specific direction. So I think this erosion of decision making that we now live, that's I think where the risk should be investigated more, rather than about what if you write codes about any deep learning models.
Yeah, I think you could probably start dividing the algorithms into, if I can call them general algorithms, for a simple use, for an obvious use, and self-learning algorithms. I think the fear that the people I know who are worried about, especially financial services, which we're not really talking about here today, it's the self-learning algorithms that try to improve the amount of profit they're making and moving from one business into another business, and then suddenly taking decisions which people probably wouldn't have allowed them to make if they'd known that they were going to stray into that area at the outset. Do you come across many of these self-learning algorithms in law, in where you are?
So it's happening quite a bit. So it's coming to our use cases as well, slowly but surely. So specifically deep reinforcement learning, the kind of technology DeepMind is using for win games in Go or StarCraft or any video games that actually simulate the game millions of times. They don't teach the system any rules, but the system learns by repetition, and they have a lot of algos just to improve the performance of that. So this is something that's happening quite a bit. So if you teach a system no rules and can figure out how it's working, then I think it needs more investigation about that on more generic examples and use cases.
Okay.
And the other thing is, now in natural language processing, there's huge trend right now, especially coming from OpenAI, to use mega data sets. Like, let's get billions of sentences and documents and see what actually we can do with it. So I think this kind of trend perhaps needs a bit more better review about what's the consequences on decision making of those systems.
The bigger the data set, the better the AI, I think, is a very simple rule. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Doesn't that depend on
But on the other hand,
it could have a lot of crappy data in there, right? It doesn't, it's kind of garbage in, garbage out, right? So it needs to be good quality data. A lot of good quality data is what's going to drive the algorithm. Sorry to interrupt, Vasilis, but
No, keep going.
No, please.
no, that's all I had to say. So.
Okay, can I ask Rachel, have you seen any algorithms in your experience that you would have thought, hang on, they shouldn't be allowed to do that? Or are you a libertarian in this field? Do you think that everybody should be entitled to do what they want? Computer scientists should be completely above the law, he said rather aggressively, and that they should be allowed to be left to code on their own at night with the lights off and do what they want.
Well, I agree with the other speakers, but I'd add that obviously when you commercialize an AI algorithm, it's a product, and it should always be, in my opinion, humans that are responsible for those products. And if those products did something that broke the law, then obviously the humans would be accountable for that. And so then the question of these self-learning algorithms comes up. They still need to be tied to some human entity, whether it's a company which is run by humans or some individuals, because then there's more incentive for those algorithms to be responsibly used and created. So that's the way I would look at it.
Okay, somebody gave me an example of King Jong-un, whatever his name is, deciding to cause trouble by releasing an algorithm onto the UK stock market that traded very aggressively and caused a crash. How do you stop that behavior? At what point do you say, hang on, this algorithm shouldn't be allowed to trade?
Well, in a way, that's almost going towards the scale of a cybersecurity breach, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's something that's
it's the intention.
Malicious, being done maliciously.
Yeah.
So we have to use measures that we can, technical measures, to try to counteract and try to give cybersecurity.
So
I think a good example there of the case where we've got existing regulators, and one of the questions that comes up a lot in the policy context is, do you have a standalone regulator in this area, or do existing regulators work on it? So there, the financial markets have their own regulator. The FCA would be pretty dissatisfied to hear about what you're describing there. So, you know, the regulatory perimeter, I think, is relatively easy to see in most existing marketplaces. And one of the things that we and the audience, we can see from the questions, people find so difficult here is general purpose technologies don't have obvious regulatory perimeters. And so if you grow up in a regulated environment, one of the things that you're constantly kind of searching out is where the perimeter sits. It's not an easy question to answer here. I think we probably all would say having some element of human in the loop is valuable, because we can go on the when AI goes wrong website and see some of the things that happen if you just let the algorithm sort of head off and do its own thing, the unintended consequences. And that's part of the balance. The legal context here is often about trade-offs, and policy questions are how you weight things in the context of those trade-offs. And I use the word weight deliberately in this context in talking about algorithms. When we get into the detail of it, you've got quite a few overlapping and competing aspects of that. So if you're talking about supervised learning, then you're feeding the answer, and the algorithm's got a target to hit. So you've got influence in it from that perspective. Unsupervised learning, you don't have the same ability to control the likely outcome. the points that people are making about data, how fresh it is, how big the data set is, and some of the cases that we've seen that have been problematic are because training sets have been, once that an audit took place, have been using data that wasn't up to date and did have inherent biases sitting in it. So when we look at these things from a particular fact pattern, there's a fairly long list of things that we're unpacking and trying to identify specifically which bits look like they've gone wrong. And then the final point, going back to where we were touching on before, some people are saying on the chat, you know, regulators, I think there's an assumption, corporations move quickly, regulators move slowly. That is historically true, and certainly the cliche, but of course in this digitalized world, the regulators will have the benefit of algorithms. They're developing algorithms too, so things will be happening more in real time. We're talking about automation in the broader sense.
Absolutely. I know some of the financial algorithms that are being written to allow the regulators to monitor trading, and you'd be absolutely frightened, I think, to know what they're looking at. I'm delighted to see from the chat that we've provoked a response from a guy called Pete Ray from Cisco. Pete, I'm sorry you can't join the conversation, but I can see that we've got your interest. It's the argument about slowing down. Regulation will slow down innovation, and there's a big move to make the UK. I think Birgitta will know, will be able to confirm this, that there's a move from government to make the UK the centre for this. You know, Britain's got to be open for business, and we need to be encouraging this type of behaviour. And he's also a bit worried about algorithms being creative art, and you can't stop people being creative. Any last observations on this point before we move? I've got to say this, we're really doing quite well here, and I've been asked to just wind this up a couple of minutes early to allow the next panel to join. So just before we leave this, any final observations from anybody, and then I'm going to move across to talk about prop tech in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, I guess a small observation. We speak about kind of the made decisions algorithm makes, but in most cases they're not made decisions, but they happen in controlled environments. So I went to our Sunlight and saw Unilever's throughput machine that is going to make washing powder more concentrated by actually having by having algorithms that decides what kind of mixed test chemical mixes and tests there should be, and they could actually produce new washing powder that was much better and in a little machine, and it could and then it costed not very much, this R&D. I can't explain all the technical elements. I saw it. So they could take a full corridor, and now you had a machine, a throughput machine that had all of the speeded with calculations from chemists and computer gamers. And this is a part of an algorithm can help us to create much more environmentally friendly and better and concentrated washing powder. The same thing that has nothing to do with big disasters. The same thing, algorithms that controls your pacemakers and make while your heart is going in different speeds has not been possible before. It's now. So lots of kind of self-learning machines has absolutely no global disaster, but they will probably be, you know, we cannot slow down these kind of, there's not a lot of big ethical debates behind them, but we need to make sure that we can move on with these closed environments and focus policy maybe on where the bigger conversations are. So we need to put things into context on the world is so a big variety, so where we're applying them. Yeah,
I think what I'm beginning to learn is what Charles has been saying is right. It's different for every sector. What's right for education, different interests, is not necessarily right for financial services, which allows me to segue very nicely into real estate. I'm going to get our real estate guys just to talk about what's actually happening deep in that sector. Jack, you've moved to Inserami, who are ensuring, as I understand it, people's deposits. Pretty tech solution and with a platform. using algorithms, and I think you know quite a bit about what's going on in other areas. If you could just give us a quick whistle-stop tour as to what you've picked up as to what's happening, and then we can get into a quick debate with Kyle. And also, I know other people would be interested, the lawyers, that one of the things that you've always thought is that the tech can help with transactions, real estate transactions, which is where the law and the contracts and the finance comes in.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, before I kind of dig into some use cases, I'll just give you a few ideas of why I think real estate is an interesting kind of industry to look at in this. I think it's because, frankly, it's not that sexy an industry. It's not, involved in decisions about what kind of university you're going to go to, what A-levels you're going to get, social media, and so on and so forth. It's often, it's an area that you can't, on the flip side, it's an area you can't really opt out of, although in theory, you can leave Facebook, or you can use a different search engine to Google, not being able to necessarily go to, King's Cross, for example, which is a privately managed estate and kind of blurs the private-public divide, not being able to go to your local shopping centre, refusing to go into work because of some of the data that might be captured on you in the workplace, aren't really choices that we really feel that we have. And so the kind of built environment is very much embedded into our daily lives in a very real way. It's also an industry that's not particularly digitally sophisticated and is very fragmented across the board. So, the idea of the FCA probably has 100 times better, I imagine, understanding of the concept of AI ethics compared to real estate, which generally on the commercial side isn't really regulated at all and is mostly run by industry bodies. And, historically has had a pretty analog way of approaching data itself. People are only just really starting to understand the power of kind of databasing and AWS and database in the cloud, let alone kind of getting to AI and then ethics. But there's definitely, as in every industry, it's starting to rear its head, and these kind of questions are starting to be asked more and more often. And just a few kind of use cases that I've come across in my time working in the industry. I think, there's a few different ways that you could say ethics and algorithms, or ethics and kind of data kind of clash. One is, where is that data coming from? What's the origin? And obviously the concept of consent comes in pretty heavily there. Real estate is still, I think, trying to get an understanding of what consent means. A lot of data about like real estate transactions, for example, is shared broadly across the market by agents without the explicit consent, and often breaching confidentiality agreements with buyers and sellers of properties, for example. But yeah, that is kind of, that's something that needs to happen if the market's going to keep turning, because we're in a private market and information needs to come out for people to be able to make decisions and have comparables and so on. So I think number one, kind of the origin of data has been very fuzzy in real estate. Number two, the use case. So even if you're using the same data, for example, using occupancy data, so using optic cameras basically within a workplace to understand what kind of areas of the office are occupied or not. That same data can be used for very, I suppose, innocent use cases, like what parts of the office should we clean more often than not. But it could also be used potentially by employers to say, well, Jack's not coming into his desk, or this team in particular don't leave that area, they're not socializing with the rest of the business, and therefore start making decisions as part of your job and so on. So I think it comes back to the, I suppose I've heard that the phrase in real estate, the creepy index, which is you can start with a data set, but there are kind of different levels of use cases that can be more creepy than others. And lastly, I think, how kind of algorithms actually play into this. And so
sorry to interrupt, Jack. Could we start looking to see if we could set up some sort of best practice targets, principles, thoughts for algorithms in the industry?
Yeah, no, exactly. So, I mean, I just finished on the algorithm example because I think that's a good case in point, which is, there's algorithms now, for example, especially if you're running housing and residential schemes, which Carl, I'm sure, can talk more about from his Greystar experience. But for example, algorithms that tell you, what kind of lease incentives should I give to this person? Right? If are they coming up on a renewal? Are they very likely to renew, or are they going to be trying to find somewhere else? And actually, it's worth me giving them a £200 discount on their next monthly rent to keep them there so that I don't have a void period. And there's algorithms like that at the moment are starting to circulate in the market and do talk about, they don't step on the toes of the Fair Housing Act. In theory, they say we very clearly exclude factors like race, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, family status from the actual algorithm themselves. But there's no one really verifying that or I suppose stepping in over that at the moment. And so I think to your point, Jeremy, I think real estate is one of those areas that's, you don't have an existing regulator. I think a watchdog or some sort of regulator stumbling into real estate would be quite clumsy. And I think there's, for me, the way I've always thought about this, it would be great to have some kind of, I suppose, leverage a commercial rationale to help people make better decisions. And maybe through something like certifications. For example, there's an ISO standard for cybersecurity that lots of real estate firms now, if they're taking on any tech solution, want to make sure you're ISO 27001 certified, for example. Is there a similar type of certification that could at least say for real estate or across different industries, this product in creating its algorithm, which is a core part of their product, has followed certain best practices around the ethics of the algorithm and so on and so forth. Okay. So I think that's the kind of solution that might work for real estate, but we're still there.
That's a good starting point. So Kyle, Jack's setting up this new regulatory body. He's asked the five of us to help. Where should we be looking first in real estate? Your company, one of the largest in the world in residential development. Do you think that there's an area of potential misuse where civilians, ordinary people, can have their rights affected? Or,
I think that it's a good segue. So master of segues, Jeremy Barnett. And essentially, I agree with everything Jack said at the end of the day. And I think from a residential real estate use case, if we look at, some of the life's biggest decisions, getting a mortgage, going to lease an apartment, right? We want to take any inherent bias out of that. We want people that can afford to live in the house, people that can afford to live in the apartment they want to live in, should be able to do that without any inherent bias. So I think that's where it's kind of a critical thing. If we look at Greystar as an example, the fair housing laws are we take them so serious that everyone in the entire company goes through a fair housing training, including myself, to our CEO, to the on-site personnel, even though I don't even talk to the tenants. But everyone needs to know about fair housing, because we do not want to discriminate against someone finding a home. This is someone's shelter, right? It's not just finding an office or finding an industrial park. So I think that's where, if you look at it from the place that could cost the most human suffering or human pain, it would probably be from the residential sector in the built environment. Yeah. We need to, we use things like referencing software and third parties to do things of that nature. But what if one of those third parties starts using a very advanced algorithm that has an inherent bias? That's a risk to the company or anyone that's working with that company. So that's something else you need to be aware of. So it's not just about algorithms for yourself, it's algorithms for what your companies that you're, contracting to. So, at the end of the day, to me, to really regulate algorithms fairly, we need to come up with what is the transparency, who is accountable, because there's a lot of these algorithms are black boxes, right? So it's like, how do you get to a point where you can actually demonstrate some sort of transparency so that if I'm in one of those classes, protected classes that Jack talked about, that I have there's no doubt that I'm going to be qualified if I'm a suitable applicant, and that the algorithm is not going to remove me.
Yeah, okay. We haven't got long left. It's a shame we've only got sort of 50 minutes or so. Vasilis, from what you've seen in, if I can call it, deep LawTech, is there going to be much of an advance in real estate transactions and use from the type of software that you're developing?
Yeah, definitely. So, of course, there's so much information on the documentation that real estate companies are having. So, and what we see is that there's not enough time for people to have a great understanding, a thorough understanding of what actually they have signed, what they're sharing with the clients, and so there's definitely information that not only that they have on the digital storage, but also if you mix it with open data, this is starting getting something very exciting. So yeah, absolutely, and we see this happening all the time nowadays.
Good. Okay. Look, I'm sure we could go into any of these topics in more detail. It's an interesting exercise just to flag the areas of interest and where we should be going if we do this again. I think the last area that I wanted to look at is really algorithms in law. I've got two questions which I'm going to roll up together, and then we can let Rachel come in, and then Charles can maybe finish off. It's about predictive justice. Going off at a complete tangent, it's one of my favourite hobby horses because I sit as a judge, and I'm frightened stupid by the idea that some algorithms are going to be written that are going to decide legal cases. There's examples in America of people writing sentencing algorithms that can score all the attributes, score all the aggravating features, score all the mitigating features, and then set a sentence depending on the availability of prison space. So computer says we've got availability for 9 months. You come back in a year's time and the same sentence has gone up to 2 years. So I really believe that machines shouldn't be allowed to make decisions about human beings. And I'm worried about the use of predictive software to predict what the outcome of the litigation is going to be, because I think it's the end of litigation in due course. We'll just have one algo saying the figure's X and the other algo saying the figure's Y, and it's the end of litigation. So Rachel, am I wrong about all of this, or do you think that I've got a point? You can tell me the truth. Tell me you think I'm just talking rubbish.
Well, obviously there are some advantages to having AI algorithms be adjudicators, because it will reduce cost, which means it will improve access to justice, which has to be a good thing. You know, when you think about it, access to justice is something very important. So you can see that there might be benefits to having this automation for things like driving, speeding offences and things like this. You can see it might improve efficiency.
Yeah.
And also it's already happening in my field of intellectual property. So a couple of weeks ago, the UK Intellectual Property Office launched their pre-assessment service for trademark registrations, and you can enter your mark and it will give you a likelihood that you would get that registered. So that means it has to check various things, including things like whether the mark is immoral. So one of the provisions in the Trademarks Act is that you cannot register an immoral mark. So that is something that we really need a human to decide, because law is reflexive in nature, as Charles has already explained. Society influences the law and law influences society. So it would be very dangerous if we start having algorithms which decide for us which things are immoral and which marks are immoral and which are not.
Well, when I was researching this, Rachel, you'd be pleased to know that the French have got a law going back to 1967, which says that only a human being can make a decision about another human being, a legal decision. You can't, the French will not allow a machine to make a legal decision about another human being. And I, for one, would love to see that in the UK, honestly. I love the use and the types of things that Vasily and Jack are talking about, and Carl. But I do think there has to be a line beyond which we just say, hang on, the humans have got to be in charge of this, not the machines. Okay, just before I wrap up.
Even though access to justice would be diminished.
Yeah, what's the point in people having access to justice if the justice doesn't have the truth, doesn't have the support of the people? We have jury trials which are notoriously inaccurate, but people trust them. We have elections in America which are notoriously unreliable, but people trust the results of an election. So yeah, I think the trust.
Not everyone does that, Jeremy.
Oh, hi, Kyle. I thought you'd fallen asleep then, mate. As soon as I mentioned Trump, he wakes up. I don't know why that is.
I was just going to say, as one gone for me, I think part of it's a matter of scale, right? Because at the end of the day, every human making a decision is a black box algorithm in someone's head going through. And so I think the challenge with algorithms is that they're infinitely more scalable to an extent than one human or one judge could be. And in the same way, you wouldn't want to have Jeremy Barnett, for example, sitting on every single court case in the country in case his particular unconscious bias came across everything. You wouldn't want to have necessarily the same algorithm going across. So I think that's part of the tension between the scalability of algorithms and humans in a matter like law.
And algorithms work on the data, so they can only, unlike cases which look forward, so we process the common law, we look at all the decisions and then decide how to apply that to a situation that's never arisen before. And I can't really see a machine doing that. Anyway, very interesting. Charles, just before we go, anything to say about sanctions?
I'm just going to pick up rather than starting a new thread, because there are a couple of points in the
other ones. Yeah, certainly.
I can pick up, and they're related to what we're talking about. So I think I'm more on Rachel's side of the last debate than yours, Jeremy. And I'm working with a business at the moment that is essentially looking at low-value commercial contracts on exactly the principle that Rachel describes, of ensuring that things that would otherwise not get litigated at all can be valued and litigated. Picking up on a point that John makes around automation of dilapidations, for sure that's coming. We've already got it in car insurance cases, so I think it's certainly likely to come and influence real estate remediation. And then a quick response to Umberto, who asked a question about the European Commission. Declaring an interest, I used to work feed into the Commission on policy matters in this area until a year ago, when I was stood down for political reasons. But I think the principles-based approach seems right to me. It's easy to get support for those sort of principles, things like fairness. It's hard to litigate fairness. I think you can start building the argument for the regulator in those circumstances, because people do need a remedy. Courts are backward looking, so the harm has already taken place. The benefit that a regulator can bring is ensuring that there are fewer circumstances where there is that need for the remedy because it's running some guide rails. And also, if we're looking at principles, we need a sophisticated and professional body that's able to support consumer protections in that area.
Right, guys, I'm getting messages from my human, not my computer, my algorithm telling us to stop.
Sorry, Jeremy, I apologize.
I'm being given areas, you see, even the computer
Jeremy,
scientist has got a face.
You know I love you, Jeremy. You know I love you. But we have to end this at some point.
It was a great conversation. Thank you all very much. I'm sorry if I've jumped around too quickly, but I think we've touched on some really interesting themes and some really interesting ideas there. And I've no doubt Emery, Adriano and myself will be back to ask you to come again when we dig deeper maybe into some of the subjects that we've looked at. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice.